In 1947, Bob Peoples broke deadlift records using this weird trick. Before PEDs, natural lifting, and with no fancy equipment, we just used the same method to add 50 kilos to my client's deadlift within 10 weeks in between competitions using the exact same method. The method I'm about to walk you through isn't just old school, it's battle tested. This system was introduced to me by my mentor, Tom Shepard. And I explored this deeply in his book, The Overload System for Strength, which he co wrote with the one and only Christian Thibodeau. This method is called the progressive range of motion training. It's an adaptation of the neurological carryover training system. And if you're a natural lifter chasing real neurological gains, this is how you hotwire your system to unlock brutal strength. Now, the strongest guys I've ever coached have always been natural lifters. You know, they weren't strong because they had better genetics. They were stronger because they had a better relationship with their neural capacity or their strength potential. What you think is a strength plateau is often just a neurological block and actually a limit on how much force you can produce, which should sound obvious, but we're often actually tapping into far less of our strength potential than we ever know. And this system is going to show you how to unlock that because your system, the internal system, is actually built to protect you. But that safety switch, it's actually costing you kilos on the bar. And this is where the progressive range of motion method actually works an absolute treat. Now, this method isn't just about brute force. You are going to use heavy loads, but it's about progressive neural recalibration. The Golgi Tendon Organ is one of the things that we're actually going to influence the most because the GTO is your body's internal governor. Now, the progressive range of motion system allows us to actually help to switch that off because this little system or this little sensor sits inside of your muscles and it protects your body from limiting how much force your muscles can produce under a perceived threat. And if we think about, our strength potential, okay, you think of the story of the lady who flips the car when it's trapping her baby. She's got the cars on top of her baby. She somehow finds strength to flip it over. We all have huge amounts of strength that we just do not tap into because these little sensors and other little systems actually inhibit how much force we use because we don't want to tear a muscle, ruin our joints, ruin our spine, things like that. For beginners or people who aren't extremely neurologically efficient, this inhibition can actually cap your muscle output by up to 50%. Okay. Elite lifters, people who are, world-class lifters, they might not have huge amounts of muscle mass. You look at, your lower weight class powerlifters or weightlifters, and they're able to lift 2, 3, 4, 5 times their body weight, and they're just able to tap and get more out of every single muscle fiber in their body. And potentially these guys are able to override the system and reduce inhibition by the GTO to as little as 20%. Okay, so they're getting an extra 30% out of every muscle contraction, what they've already have, or extra 30% of their strength potential, just because they've been able to train that out of it. So here's the science of how this works, okay? Every time you expose your body to near maximal load through dead starts, especially using this progressive range of motion method, your nervous system starts to register the experience as non-threatening. Think of it is like the first time you unrack or walk out a heavy squat and you're shaking all over the place. The body's just freaking out. It's like, holy shit, this is a heavy load. I need everything firing as much as I possibly can because there's a big threat to my body. What this progressive range of motion method does, because you're using heavy loads all the time, it starts to register that as non-threatening. You don't freak out as much, and you get both neurological and psychological benefits to this. And what it also does is it slowly dials down that inhibition of the GTO. So the progressive range of motion also increases your strength really rapidly because it increases tendon resiliency, gives you thicker, stronger tendons, which are able to store and use more force throughout a full range of motion as you develop this. And One of the best ways to develop tendons is by high repetition or high volume methods. And at the start of using the progressive range of motion method, you're going to do a lot more reps at a shorter range of motion. So it is going to help with that. Each short range overload strengthens the connective tissues under real tension. You got extreme amounts of tension, increasing their ability to handle load and recover faster. Now, tendons adapt slower to muscles, but because this method gives them that repeated controlled exposure that they need to reinforce and rebuild, it is a great system for helping to improve the tendon thickness and resiliency. And this is something I've seen with athletes who don't use a lot of eccentric training or a lot of high volume band work, and they're often getting sore joints or sore tendons or just breaking down. Doing this sort of work can actually help to increase the resiliency of the athlete overall. So it is a great, great system. And we do this by repeating reps under high tension from a static position. You're essentially, the tendons are under load, and you're repeating high load for high tension for a lot of reps. And what you're also doing here is you're teaching the nervous system to fire more efficiently, increasing motor unit recruitment, and improving inter and intramuscular coordination. And now, when all of those things are going really, really well and you're recruiting a lot of that, what happens is at some point, if you're recruiting as much as you possibly can, your nervous system is going to start to ask it to fire faster. Okay. And so that's going to increase your firing rate, going to make you a more fast twitch dominant athlete, and it's going to allow you to get more out of your entire system. What this will do is build a nervous system that sees heavy as normal and not threatening. Okay, so through consistent exposure, PRM teaches your system that more is safe, and that's the real science behind. Or that's not even the science; it's the secret behind these world class lifts and getting very very strong, and why this method works so well. So let's break it down a little bit. Okay, so this method was actually first popularized by Paul Anderson. Okay, so he's an old time strongman. He's back before they had steroids, back before they had weight racks, squat racks, before they had all fancy equipment. He essentially started in his backyard with barrels and holes. He'd dig holes in his backyard to the point where he was able to get underneath a squat bar with barrels on it, and he'd do a small range of motion. He'd do lots and lots of reps. Every couple of weeks, he'd shorten the range by adding dirt. Okay, so he'd add just a little bit more dirt so that it increased the range of motion of that squat with those barrels. The cool thing about this is the backyard became his lab, and this is why I love these old school methods. There was no tech, just brutal intuition. They had no sports science. They had no, people debating on the internet about is this going to work or not. They literally just got in there and done it, which was very, very cool. And then that sort of led me to finding out about how Bob Peoples used this. And so Bob Peoples he was a 75 or a 79 kilo lifter, and he deadlifted 725 pounds, which is roughly about 325 kilos. So well over 4 times his body weight, which is absolutely phenomenal back in the 1940s. This was long before PEDs. This was long before sports science. He had no ice baths. He had no fucking morning routine. He literally just got in there and done the work. Okay, so the cool thing about this and why I love it so much is I train natural lifters, and I'm always looking for how can I find an advantage to get the most out of our lifters without having to use all these enhancements. And if we look at back in history, it leaves clues. Okay, it shows us methods and tools and systems that could potentially get great results before everything else got a little bit muddied and got a little bit more experimental in the lab and stuff like that. And if you just look at going back to the science of this, you understand that these guys were so strong because they just understood and they felt that if I just lift heavy shit more often for the small range of motion, I'm going to get very, very strong. And that's essentially what it is. And you look at old time strong people, you look at farmers, people call it farm strong, and that they've just got repeated exposure to heavy stuff more often. And eventually you just get strong to that, and you just start to realize that strong is strong. These people have more exposure to heavy hard stuff, and they just essentially got they just acclimatize to it. So Bob Peoples, with that amazing deadlift, his philosophy was just literally like work hard, be creative, figure it out. What can we do here? We don't have anyone around us, but I'm just going to commit to brutal simplicity. And deadlifting, those sorts of weights back then, I'm sure if he had the same sort of methods or the same sort of people around to apply some of what we have now, using a similar method, he could have, potentially deadlifted even more, which is very, very cool. So what we did though is we took that and we adapted it to a more modern version. Okay. And so we learned this from our mentor, Tom Shepard. And we essentially created the cycle length. Generally, you're going to use a cycle length or a program length about 8 to 12 weeks with a method like this. And you may do it 2 times a year after you've built out a huge amount of capacity, by doing general strength training, your general hypertrophy work, building your strength base. Then you go and peak out the system using this sort of style of training. So we used about a 10-week block, okay? And what we essentially did at the start was you're going to pick a weight that is somewhere between 5 and 10 kilos more than your all-time best. And you're going to start with a very, very small range of motion, during about 2 inches, which is about, I don't know, 6 to 10 centimeters, or like a 10-kilo plate if you don't have blocks or pins to set up. That's going to be about the range of motion that you move. So very, very short range of motion. We used a 4-day split. Okay, so we had essentially a squat bench day 1, a squat bench day 2, a deadlift press day 1, and a deadlift press day 2. And the way that we set up this and the way it worked was on day 1, you would do an AMRAP for 2 to 3 sets at the set height and load. Now, your goal is obviously to get as many reps as possible. At the start of the progression, you're going to probably hit somewhere between 15 or so reps, okay? As you obviously progress down in height, those reps are going to decrease as you get more and more range of motion. So on day 1, your goal is to do as many reps as you possibly can at that chosen height. On day 2 of, say, the squat and the bench, you'll do your AMRAP, and if you beat your previous AMRAP and you get, say, 16 reps or 17 reps at the same height and load, you actually build up to a 1 RM for the day. Now, we found this worked an absolute treat, especially about 4 or 5 weeks in. We started to notice that our lifter, he just started to get acclimatized to some very, very heavy weights very, very well, because let's say, for example, you have 270 on the bar and you do 17 reps. Then you build up to 300 kilos, cool, as a 1 RM at that height. You've now gone 30, 40 kilos above your 1 RM, and you're just starting to get like the handle or the feel for some very, very heavy loads. Now, this can give you a potential post-activation potentiation work, and it's also going to get some neurological and psychological carryovers to the next time you get to your squat bench day 1, because on that next day 1, you're actually going to decrease the height. So you're going to lower the height or increase the range of motion. And because you've just done that, 10, 20, 30 kilos more for that 1 rep max, you're going to find the next time you get to that lower height, it's going to feel very, very light. So that cycle, you go squat bench on day 1, squat bench 1 day 1, then you go deadlift press day 1, then you go squat bench day 2, squat bench 2 on day 3, then you go deadlift press 2 on day 4, and you cycle through that. Each time you hit a rep max or that 1 RM, you decrease the weight, you decrease the height on the next day. And it's running through that progression system is absolutely phenomenal. I'll go into the accessory work later on, but here's how you execute it really well. You don't want to start too deep or too heavy. You want to just go 5 to 10 kilos above your max. Don't go too much more, because at the start, it's going to feel very easy. If you're used to traditional powerlifting programs, you're probably going to be used to somewhere between 3 to 8 reps max, and this at the very, very start, you're most likely going to get somewhere between 12 and 20 reps at that very first height. So you're going to be tempted to obviously increase the weight, or decrease the height a lot faster. But stay patient with it, earn every single inch, and you'll find that you get the most out of it, because the whole point of this whole entire method is to get used to that heavy weight. And the more you touch that heavy weight, the more reps you get, the more your body's going to start to switch off those switches that inhibit strength. Another big rule with this is to maintain comp lift technique. Okay. And one of the biggest reasons why this method will fail is the lifter not using the actual technique they use for the full range of motion. So let's take, for example, a sumo deadlift. Okay. And so at the start of a sumo, or when you're in a full competition lift sumo deadlift, you're going to set yourself in a position that, allows you to stay directly over the bar, center your center of mass, and also put it in a good position to lift. Now, the fault or the potential risk of doing the progressive range of motion method is you get behind the bar and you almost hitch underneath the bar and you almost scoop the deadlift up. And if you do that, especially right from the start, you're going to change the mechanics of the deadlift, and it's actually going to mess up the progression. So make sure every inch of the way you have exactly the same technique as your normal lift would look like. Beautiful thing about this is you get to work on your technique for every inch of the movement, and it's a great technical tool for you to learn how to create tension, for you how to maintain or keep good mechanics at that position, and it allows you to strengthen that position as well. Dead starts only. Obviously, lifting from pins or blocks is going to, allow you to bounce it or use touch and go reps, but we don't want to use that for two reasons. Is one, obviously, you're going to, if you touch and go on a deadlift, you're going to use the stretch reflex in a place you normally don't have it, which isn't going to train your ability to contract the muscles at that position. And you also are losing one of the most powerful factors of this method, which is teaching your body to contract and produce force at that range of motion from a dead start. This will make you stronger throughout the entire range of motion. And if you touch and go it or use that stretch reflex, you may minimize or reduce some of the actual benefits of this method. So for our accessory work, we just used full range of motion builder movements. Okay, so for our squat, we actually use the front squat in the first phase. First sort of 3 to 4 weeks, we actually use the heel elevated front squat to increase further the range of motion, because we wanted to, one, build the quads and upper back strength, but two, also, make sure we maintain movement through the full range of motion as well. For deadlifts, you can use something like a good morning, an RDL, snatch grip dead, whatever you like in that case. Whatever you need to improve the weakness or the weak point of the lifter as well. Same with the bench press and the overhead press. Choose a builder exercise that moves for a larger range of motion, and a weaker variation or a less neurologically demanding variation, to keep the body in balance. We also use bottom half isometrics, and we found that these are particularly with the deadlift. We use the functional isometric, and we found that this was one of the things that improved the pull from the floor massively, massively. And so essentially, a bottom half isometric, you have 2 pins at your weakest point on the bottom half position, and you lift about 4 inches. Okay, and you load up as much as you can, lift into that pin, hold for 6 to 9 seconds. You get a very, very strong neurological stimulus in this, and it also allows you to still work that bottom half and still get that strength potentiation, or tap into that strength, those neurological gains at the bottom half of the range of motion as well. Because as I'm sure some of you have realized, like, if you're just constantly training partial range of motion at the top half, you will lose some of that bottom half strength as well. So that's how we train that. You can use eccentric on that bottom half. We didn't use it. We just found it a little bit difficult to set up. We didn't have things like weight releases or anyone to take off plates and stuff like that, but it would be a phenomenal tool if you're able to do it. For our peak phase, we actually 1 to 2 weeks out added speed pulls from a full range of motion. Just to one, obviously, as the weight's getting heavier and heavier, your velocity is starting to decrease. So adding in those full range speed pulls allowed us to get some technical work in the full range of motion, but also increase our ability to get some great velocity through the bar as well. So it did give us that little edge in terms of being able to take maximal force production and add some speed to that, giving us a very, very powerful athlete. After this program, we have actually gone back to a 4 week anatomical adaptation phase to restore balance, rebuild tissue capacity, and train for a larger range of motion. And also, we've chosen methods that say, for example, a Frankenstein squat, which are far less neurologically demanding than, say, super maximal back squat. Okay, so this is helping us rebuild patterns, fix any niggles, and then rebuild for a weightlifting world champs, which we're actually training for now. So as you can tell, this method isn't for hobby lifters, definitely not for new people, because you will run into problems with neurological fatigue. You will run into problems with technical issues as well if you don't stick to or have a good understanding of what your technique looks like for especially those sorts of loads. But for lifters who love to feel heavy load, do respond really, really well to, having maximal weights on their body all the time. This is an absolute nuclear bomb of a neuro protocol, and it's going to give you some big, big payoffs. It'll change the way you think, lift, and carry yourself. You'll get to practice under top end load more than ever before, increasing the psychological component. So you'll get more used to those heavy loads. These heavy lifts won't feel heavy anymore. And you'll build confidence throughout it, knowing that, holy shit, I just, ripped out 3 reps at 2 inches from the floor over my all-time best, and so it's huge. You also feel what real tension is at the hardest part of your lift. So you're going to fill out all of your lifts. You're going to delete any weakness you have. And then you'll start to override that inner safety mechanism and build a very, very neurologically efficient lifter and athlete, which is very, very cool. Great method, but only if you respect it. Okay, and this is where science meets old school grift. Okay, old school grit. If you're able to apply this method properly and you're able to respect it, knowing that, hey, this is heavy, heavy loads, but still show up, do the work, no fluff, no gimmicks, you'll get some incredible results. So if you're plateaued, if you're stuck fighting, for 2 kilos increase every couple months or so, this could be a system that may help you break through that plateau. It works very, very well for us. I've seen, my mentor, Tom, his wife set an all-time world record on squat using this method as well. A lot of people finding some huge gains from it. If you respect the process, earn the range, you'll unlock what's been waiting in your nervous system all along. It's been doing a lot of work and you just feel like you just need something to get a massive win. This is a system. And if you're looking at a new look at your training, do feel free to apply for coaching. We can have a chat. Just use the link in the comments. Or if you'd like to ask any questions, please do comment or subscribe to this channel and as we can. Thanks for listening.